People called survival a hard thing, as if hardness were the point, as if endurance were measured by how long a woman could clench her teeth and carry what grief left behind. Alara had learned a harsher truth in the 5 years since fire took her pack, and steel took her mate. Survival was softness trained into vigilance, a hand that could soothe a child while counting exits, a voice that could barter for flour while swallowing a true name. Hope was not bright. Hope was quiet. Hope was a boy with molten gold eyes and another man's command in his bones, laughing over bruised apples in a market where no one could ever know what he was. By late afternoon, the border market smelled of wet wool, lamp oil, and river mud baking under weak autumn sun. Alara shifted the sack of barley from one hip to the other, pulse already too fast. She had slept little, stitched all morning, and spent the last of her copper on winter salt. Kale trotted beside her, small boots dusty, dark curls refusing to stay tied back. He was 5 and wiry and too observant for any mother trying to hide him from wolves. "Hands to yourself, little Reed," she murmured, not looking down. "No touching stalls." "I only touch the cat," he whispered. "The cat does not count." A breath of laughter almost escaped her. Almost. Then the shouting started near the grain scales. Owen Blackwood's men had taken over Old Way Station duties that month, part of the Blackwood Pack's slow rebuilding in the town's fractured bones. Most days they kept order well enough. Today, Owen's beta stood on a wagon step with 3 guards fanned behind him, broad shoulders rigid, voice cutting through trade noise. "Coins are missing from quarter bins. This is the 3rd theft in 6 days. Street brats have been swarming the stalls since dawn. Bring them forward." The market tightened around the words like hide around a drum. 2 fishmongers shoved a pair of boys away from their counter. An old woman clutched her basket to her chest and spat at the ground near a little girl's shoes. Alara felt the familiar slide of dread under her ribs. Not us. Not today. Kale went still, chin lifting in that dangerous way he had when injustice struck him like a thrown stone. She caught his sleeve. "Stay with me." The beta pointed at a knot of children near the smokehouse. "Search their pockets." One of the children cried out, offended and frightened. A guard reached, not rough but firm, and the crowd supplied the cruelty for him. "They all steal. Wild pups, no den manners. Should mark their hands so we know them." Heat crawled up Alara's throat. She knew this script. She had lived it in prettier halls, under moon banners and carved beams, where civilized wolves used law to wound and called it order. Kale pulled free of her fingers. "No." He stepped into open space before she could catch him. Small body squared, voice clear enough to strike stone. "You cannot accuse pups without sworn witness. Old pack law says so." Silence hit like a slammed gate. Even the gulls along the river seemed to fall quiet. The beta stared down at him. "Whose child are you?" Kale held his ground. "A charge without oath is slander. You owe apology." The words were formal, old form, learned from no human school in this town. Alara's blood ran cold. She had taught him stories in whispers, never commands, never courtroom cadence. Yet there it was in his mouth, exact and sharp. A murmur moved through nearby wolves. One guard shifted, suddenly uncertain. Then the beta made his mistake. He gave a humorless half-smile and said, "You challenge me, pup?" Kale's pupils widened. A low thrum seemed to gather in the air around him, not sound exactly, more pressure, as if the market itself had inhaled and forgotten to exhale. "Kneel," he said. The word cracked across the square with raw authority. It was not loud. It did not need to be. 3 grown wolves dropped to one knee as if pulled by unseen chain. A 4th staggered and braced against a barrel. The beta stayed standing for 1 heartbeat, 2. Jaw clenched hard enough to show white at the corners, then bent with a curse bitten short. Kale blinked. shocked by what he had done. Alara moved at last, crossing the space in 3 strides, grabbing him to her side so fast he squeaked. The crowd parted around a new arrival without anyone announcing him. Owen Blackwood stepped from the lane that led up from the pack's temporary hall, rain-dark hair pushed back, travel cloak open over training leathers, presence like a held storm. He had the look of a man built for command and exhausted by earning it twice. Scar tissue traced pale along one side of his throat and disappeared beneath his collar. His gaze swept the kneeling men, the stunned merchants, then landed on Cale. Molten amber bled into his irises. Alara knew that color. She had seen it once by lightning light in a mountain cabin years ago, when a stranger with grief in his hands had knocked at her door half dead and asked only for shelter until dawn. Owen approached slowly, palms open, as if nearing a wounded animal. He crouched to Cale's height and reached for the boy's shoulder with deliberate care. Alara slapped his hand away. Skin met skin. Heat struck her sternum so hard she gasped. A ringing pulse flared behind her ears. The scent thread around them changed in an instant, market grime and smoke burning off into rain on cedar, ash banked under iron, and that one impossible memory of storm-soaked skin in firelight. Owen reeled back a half step, hand flying to his chest as if he had taken a blow. His gaze snapped to hers, feral brightness rising, then he went very still. "Storm cabin," he said, voice gone rough. "You!" Her knees wanted to fold, not here, not now. Inside her, old compartments split open at once. Widow, mother, fugitive. The woman who had buried one mate and vowed never to bind her survival to another man's power. The woman who had woken alone before dawn 5 years ago, already carrying a life she could not explain, and walked into exile without looking back. All of them shouted over each other until only one thought remained, clean and hard. Run now. Keep him behind you. Trust no rank. The beta forced himself upright, face flushed with humiliation. Alpha, the child used command on officers in public square. Alpha. The title swept through the market like wind through dry grass, followed by whispers gathering speed. Blackwood Heir? No, look at her. That is the Ash Widow from River Row. She hid him. She trapped the Alpha. Each word struck Alara like pebbles thrown by unseen hands. Cale pressed into her skirts, confused, lower lip trembling with effort not to cry. Owen did not look away from her. What is his name? She should have lied. She had lied about everything else for 5 years and survived by it. But the bond humming between them made falsehood feel like stepping on broken glass. Cale. A flicker crossed his face, brief and devastating. Wonder. Fear. Recognition. Then discipline dropped over him like armor. "Garrick," he said to his beta without raising his voice. "Stand down." Garrick's nostrils flared. "With respect, Alpha, if this is bloodline matter, the council must secure the child until rights verify claim." Secure. A neat word for taking. Alara's hand went to the knife hidden in her sleeve out of reflex she hated and trusted. "No one takes my son." Several wolves tensed. Cale's fingers found hers and clamped tight. Owen noticed the motion, the blade habit, the panic she could no longer mask. He lowered himself fully to one knee in front of them both, not in submission, in calibration. "No one touches him without your leave," he said quietly. She wanted to believe him. She wanted that almost enough to be dangerous. A woman near the spice cart laughed under her breath. "Hear that? Leave. Since when does an alpha ask permission from a liar?" Another voice, male, harsh with old prejudice. "If she kept a claim child hidden, she has already broken pack law. Put irons on her until hearing." Abandonment had teeth. It bit hardest when it arrived, dressed as procedure. Alara backed away one step, then another, keeping Cale behind her hips. Owen remained kneeling, eyes on her, every line of his body intent and restrained, but his guards had begun to form a perimeter around the square. Whether to protect or contain, she could not tell. The difference could vanish in a single order. By full dark, councils would convene. By moonrise, she and Cale could be inside walls that did not open from the inside. She did not wait to test which outcome this day had chosen. "Cale," she whispered, "home, fast." She turned and ran. Market cries shattered behind them. Someone shouted for Gates. Someone else called her name, the false one she used in town, then her true one from years buried. "Ilara." She did not look back. They flew through the dye-maker's lane, dodging hanging skeins that brushed her face with wet wool and indigo. Cale's breath came in sharp little pulls, boots slapping stone. She hooked his hand over her forearm to keep pace and cut through the tanner's yard where lime stung her nose and dogs barked from chained posts. A cartwheel clipped her hip. Pain flared. She did not slow. Think. Present tense, brutal, and precise. Pack the records. Take winter cloaks. Leave the loom. Burn the false papers. River path, not North Road. Avoid the west gate where wolves hold watch. Behind her, distant, the bronze bell at Blackwood Hall began to ring. Once, twice, summons. By the time they reached her narrow cottage on River Row, twilight had sunk to iron blue. Her hands shook so hard she missed the latch on the first try. Cale stumbled inside and turned in place, wide-eyed. "Mama, that man had my eyes." The words nearly dropped her to the floor. She barred the door, dragged the trunk from beneath the bed, and lifted the wrapped oilcloth packet from its hidden compartment. Lineage records, names inked in her first mate's hand, proof Raven Duskwalker had spent years trying to erase. She had guarded them through hunger, fever, and winter storms. Now they had become a beacon. Outside, boots sounded on the lane, measured and many. Cale looked from the window slit to her face. "Are we leaving?" "Yes." His chin wobbled, then steadied with fierce little dignity that hurt to witness. "Do I bring my carved wolf?" She swallowed. "Bring it." He ran for his blanket roll. Ilara slung the record packet across her back, sheathed her knife at her thigh, and blew out the hearth flame with one long breath. Darkness swallowed the room she had built from scraps and stubbornness. For 5 years it had been enough. A fist struck the door. Not hard, once, then again. "Ilara?" Owen's voice, low through wood. "Open, please." She stood motionless, hand over Cale's mouth to quiet his breathing, listening to the rain begin at last against the roof. Each drop a small urgent drumbeat toward whatever came next. Rain thickened, steady and cold, while Ilara held her breath and counted heartbeats against the wood grain under her palm. Cale trembled against her skirts. Carved wolf clutched in one fist, the other pressed over her wrist where her pulse raced too hard to hide. Outside, boots shifted on wet stone, then stilled. "Ilara," Owen said again, quieter. "I came alone to the door. Garrick and the others are at the lane mouth. They will not cross your threshold unless you ask it." She did not answer. Silence had kept her alive longer than trust ever had. His voice came through the crack beneath the frame, roughened by rain and restraint. "You can run from me tonight if you choose. I will not drag you." But Raven's scouts were seen south of the river at dusk. If he knows Cale used command in open market, this house is no longer hidden. Let me get you both behind wards before moonrise. Raven. The name hit like ice slipped under a collar. Ilara closed her eyes for one hard second. He had found every refuge eventually. Every one. She lifted her hand from Cale's mouth. "Back room," she whispered. "If I say floor, you lie flat. Do you understand?" His lower lip shook, but he nodded and ran, blanket roll bumping against his knees. Ilara drew her knife and eased the bar from the door. She opened it only a handspan, blade angled low where rain glossed the metal blue. Owen stood on the step, soaked through, unarmed except for the short utility blade every wolf carried for rope and game. No ceremonial steel, no armor. His hair clung dark to his temples. Water traced the scar at his throat. He looked less like an alpha on a threshold and more like a man asking to be believed when he had no right to expect it. "Show me your hands," she said. He raised them, palms outward, then slowly turned them to show wrists bare of binding cuffs. "May I speak where your son cannot hear the hard parts?" "Hard parts are all he hears these days." A muscle moved in his jaw. "Then he hears this too. I failed to protect my first pack. I will not fail him." Her grip tightened. "You do not get to call him yours because his eyes match yours." "No," he said. "I call him mine because I felt him in my bones the moment he spoke law." He swallowed, gaze dropping for a fraction of a breath to the hidden knife at her thigh and then back to her face. "And because 5 winters ago, a woman with ash on her sleeves hid me from hunters and sat awake all night to keep me breathing. She vanished before dawn, and I thought I had imagined her mercy. I did not." The memory rose without permission, thunder shaking shutters, his body fever-hot under rough blankets. Her own grief still raw enough to bleed through every breath. She had never told him her name. He had never told her his title. They had traded survival and silence, nothing more. Yet the space between them now felt charged with all the words neither of them had been free to carry then. A sharp scrape sounded from the lane. Instantly Owen shifted, not toward her, but sideways to shield the doorway with his body. "Alpha," a guard called from the dark. "Movement on the roofline, west side. Could be nothing." "Could be not," Owen answered without looking away from Alara. "Hold perimeter. No arrows loosed unless I command it." Fear hardened into decision. If Raven's eyes were already on River Row, hiding here was a fantasy she could no longer afford. She stepped back from the door. "You walk in front. Kale stays between us. Any wolf reaches for him, I cut first and apologize never." For the first time that night, a brief, startled humor touched Owen's mouth. No mockery in it, only weary respect. "Understood." Before she stepped into the rain, she pulled the oilskin-wrapped lineage records from beneath the hearthstone niche and strapped the packet flat against her ribs under her cloak. By the time she doused the last ember and locked the empty house behind them, rain had turned the lane to slick black mirror. 4 Blackwood guards waited under cloaks at the bend, all broad shoulders and wary discipline, each of them staring one beat too long at Kale before lowering their eyes. None knelt. None spoke. They simply formed a moving wall and started uphill toward the pack's temporary stronghold. The climb to Blackwood Hall cut through the old mill roads and collapsed terraces, where war had chewed the town years earlier. Water streamed off broken stone, carrying soot smell from long, cold burns whenever their boots struck, loosened ash beneath fresh mud. Alara's legs shook by the third rise. She had hauled grain all day, run half the district, and now forced her body onward on fear alone. Kale stumbled once, twice, then Owen slowed without comment until the child could keep pace. At the top ridge, the hall came into view through rain. Not a palace, not yet, but a rebuilt fortress grown from ruins. Timber palisades ringed the old granary walls. Watchfires burned under iron hoods to keep the flame alive in weather. Wolves moved along the ramparts in pairs, boughs rapped against damp. Beyond them, she glimpsed rows of new cottages and drying racks, wagons under tarps, children's chalk marks still visible near a stone trough despite the storm. A settlement trying to become a home before winter took its vote. Exhaustion pressed at the base of her skull. She had spent 5 years teaching herself not to be moved by other packs' strength, not to envy what hierarchy could build when it chose protection over pride. But this place was not only power, it was labor, scars, and stubborn rebuilding. She recognized that language. The outer gate opened with a groan of wet hinges. Inside, conversation dropped to silence in ripples as they passed. Men and women paused mid-task with kindling, ledger boards, butcher hooks, swaddled bundles. Their attention found Cale first, then Ilara, then Owen walking close enough to claim responsibility, but not ownership. Suspicion lived in many of those faces. So did hunger for certainty. A gray-haired woman by the cook she'd muttered not quietly, "That is the river widow." Another voice answered, younger, uncertain, "The boy smells like storm cedar and blackwood iron." Ilara kept her chin level and her hand on Cale's shoulder as if she had not heard. Shame wanted to bloom, anger beat it back. She had crossed too much fire to bow to gossip in a courtyard. Owen guided them into the long hall annex used for council overflow, warmer than the rain and smelling of cedar smoke, wet wool, and medicinal herbs drying from rafters. A map table stood under lamplight, edges weighted with stone wolves worn smooth by handling. He stopped several paces from her, giving room before speaking. "You can take the east guest room. One door, one window, inside bolt. I will station 2 sentries outside and rotate them on your schedule, not mine. If you prefer no guards at the door, I will place them at stair and courtyard instead." She stared at him, thrown by the offer itself. Alphas gave orders. They did not negotiate security placement with frightened women in borrowed halls. "What do you want in return?" she asked. His answer came fast, almost fierce. "Truth. Not tonight if you cannot, but soon." He exhaled, and some of the steel left his shoulders. "And a chance to know my son without tearing your world apart to do it." Cale had gone very quiet. He stood by the hearth now, small hands spread toward heat, listening with that solemn concentration that made him seem older than 5. When Owen took one step nearer, Cale turned, gaze direct. "Are you really Alpha?" he asked. "Yes." "Do Alphas always make people kneel?" The question landed between them like a blade set flat on a table. Owen crouched so they were eye level. "Bad ones do. Tired ones do. Frightened ones do. Good ones try not to unless lives depend on it." Cale considered this with grave intensity. "I did not mean to make them kneel." "I know." Owen's voice gentled. "Your command came from protecting weaker pups. That matters." Ilara watched Cale absorb the words, shoulders easing by a fraction, and felt her own guard shift without permission. Not lower. Different. Then Owen stood and turned to her. "There is one thing I need to ask before council hears rumors and turns them into law." He held out his hand, not reaching, only offering. "May I confirm the bond with witness sense, so no one can challenge your place under my protection tonight?" Protection. The word should have soothed. Instead, it scraped old wounds raw. Protection had failed her before. Protection had died with her first mate's blood on stone. Yet the pull between her and Owen had only grown sharper since the market, a low current beneath skin and breath that made distance feel like strain. She took one step forward because she needed answers more than safety now, and laid her fingers against his. Heat surged up both their arms at once, fierce and unmistakable. The room seemed to narrow to the space between their joined hands. Scent unfurled around them in layered recognition, rain on cedar, hearth ash, wild mint crushed under boot, and the intimate salt-warm note of skin remembered from one impossible night. Owen's breath caught hard. Amber bled through his irises until something ancient and wolf-bright looked out from his gaze, not threatening, reverent and stunned. Ilara swayed. The tight knot behind her ribs loosened and then pulled taut again, pain and relief braided so closely she could not separate them. Grief for the life she had buried, terror for the life she had built in secret. a dangerous, aching want to stop carrying both alone. In the present moment, her thoughts came in jagged flashes. This is real. This is him. This can ruin us. This can save us. I do not know which. I do not know if those are different things anymore. Owen whispered her name like a vow he had no right to speak. Ilara. She looked up fully then, into eyes that mirrored her son's, and held his stare without flinching. Rain hammered the roof. Fire cracked in the hearth. Around them, even the guards at the far door had gone still. Recognition locked into place, undeniable and irrevocable, and neither of them let go. The contact broke only when Cale made a small, uncertain sound by the hearth, the sound of a child watching adults stand too still with too much in their faces. Ilara pulled her hand back first, pressing her palm against her skirt as if she could cool the heat there. Owen stepped away with equal care, chest rising once, sharply, then settling under discipline she could almost hear locking into place. "I will have food sent up," he said, voice controlled but rough at the edges. "And dry clothes for both of you. Nothing enters your room without your word." He turned to the guards at the far door. 2 at the east stair, 2 in the courtyard. No one approaches that corridor without clearance from me or from Ilara Darkhollow herself. The use of her true name, spoken into his hall like a matter of law, made several heads lift. He did not soften it. He did not ask if she preferred the false one she had lived under. He named her as she was. Cale looked between them, then at Owen. "Can I have honey bread?" A startled breath escaped Ilara, almost a laugh, almost tears. Owen's mouth shifted, brief warmth through exhaustion. "You can have 2 pieces if you promise not to feed the crumbs to the sentries. They already like you too much." Cale took this as solemn treaty and nodded. The east guest room was plain, clean, and warmer than any place Ilara had slept in years. A narrow bed stood against one wall, a smaller cot beside it, both layered with thick wool blankets that smelled of cedar chests and sun-dried soap. The window shutters latched from inside. The bolt was iron, new forged. She tested it twice. She tested the window twice more. Only then did she let Cale remove his wet boots. He ate honey bread in sleepy silence, leaning against her knee, while she pretended to sip broth she could not taste. Outside, footsteps passed at measured intervals. Guard rotations. Real ones. Not performative. When Cale finally sagged against the pillow, curls damp across his brow, she waited for his breathing to deepen before easing her knife from her sleeve. She set it beneath her own pillow by habit so old it felt like bone memory. A knock came, soft enough not to wake a child. "Ilara?" Owen's voice, low through the door. "May I enter?" She froze, then stood and crossed the room without sound. Opening the door a fraction, she kept her body in the gap. He had changed into dry, dark wool and looked no less tired for it. Rain had left his hair curling at the temples. He held not weapons, but a folded child's nightshirt, too small for him to have found without asking someone who kept stores. "You forgot this in the annex," he said, lifting it slightly. "I did not want him cold before dawn." She took it without touching his hand. "Thank you." He did not move to leave. "Garrick requested an immediate hearing tonight. I refused. Council convenes tomorrow at midday. Until then, no one will question you, separate you from Cale, or demand testimony." She studied him, waiting for the price hidden under the gift. "It will cost you politically," she said. "Yes." "You still did it?" "Yes." The quiet between them stretched, full of things she did not know how to name without breaking open. At last she asked the question that mattered most. "Why restraint?" For the first time since Market Square, his control showed strain. Not anger. Old damage. Because I know what power does when it believes urgency excuses cruelty, he said. 5 years ago, I was too late for people I loved. I built this pack on a single rule after that. We do not repeat the violence that made us homeless, even when fear tells us it would be efficient. His gaze flicked past her shoulder toward the sleeping cot. And because the boy is already listening to every tone I use, if I claim him by force, I teach him force is kinship. I will not give him that inheritance. The words landed deep, past suspicion, into the place where her anger had armored itself around grief. She closed the door gently and leaned her forehead against the wood for one beat, then two, breathing like she had run miles uphill. Sometime after moonrise, Cale woke screaming. It was not loud at first, only a choked cry that snapped into a full panic wail as he sat upright, claws half-formed at the tips of his fingers, pupils blown wide. Ilara was at his side in an instant, hands hovering because she had learned the hard way that touching a child mid-terror could make the terror bite. Cale, look at me. You are in the East Room. You are safe. Breathe with me. He thrashed, little body rigid. Fire, he gasped. Door hot. Couldn't open. Mama, I couldn't. The nightmare was old. It had lived in him since he was too small to understand why she slept in clothes and boots, why every strange noise sent her to the window with a blade. He had never seen the burning pack, but memory traveled in scent, in pulse, in the stories adults thought they swallowed. A shadow moved at the threshold. Owen stood there, drawn by the cry, then stopped without crossing. Ilara, he said quietly, do you want me to stay out? She looked at him, at the way he held himself just beyond the doorway, as if the line mattered more than his title, and something in her decision came clean. Come in. Slow. He entered and immediately went to one knee on the floor, not near enough to crowd, not far enough to feel absent. His voice dropped to the cadence wolves used with startled foals and grieving pups. Cale, you are hearing stormwater on stone, not fire. Listen with me. Cale's breaths came ragged. I can't stop. You do not need to stop, Owen said. You only need to count. I will count wrong on purpose, and you tell me when I miss. It was absurd enough that Ilara stared. Owen began anyway. 1, 2, 4, 7. Cale blinked mid-sob, offended through fear. That's bad counting. I was told I am deeply flawed. Despite herself, Ilara made a strangled sound that might have been laughter. Cale sucked in a shaking breath and whispered, 3, then 4. Correct, Owen said with grave respect. Again. 1, 2, 3, 5, 4, Cale said softer. Ah, a devastating error. Good thing we have a better mathematician. Count by count. The panic loosened. Claws receded. Shoulders dropped by degrees. Ilara watched Owen keep his hands visible, palms on his own knees, never reaching without invitation. When Cale finally sagged, exhausted, Owen looked to her first. May I touch him? The question struck her harder than any command could have. She nodded once. Owen placed one broad hand very lightly against the boy's upper back and matched his own breathing to the child's, slow and even. Cale leaned, almost unconsciously, into the contact, not claimed, comforted. Ilara sat on the bed edge, fingers twisted in blanket wool, and her mind broke into present tense fragments the way it did when fear and relief collided. I am waiting for the turn. I am waiting for him to take, to declare, to make this about rank. It does not come. He is kneeling on my floor in the middle of the night like patience is a duty, not a favor. I do not know where to put this kind of mercy. I have lived so long inside contingency that gentleness feels like a trap with better lighting. But Cale is breathing. Cale is safe. The room holds 3 heartbeats and none of them are hunting the others. Maybe trust is not a door. Maybe it is this. A series of small permissions that do not get punished. Cale's lashes fluttered shut. Within minutes he slept, one hand still gripping the carved wolf. Owen withdrew his hand and stayed kneeling another moment, as if rising too quickly might fracture the calm they had made. Then he stood and moved toward the door. Halfway there, he stopped. "May I remain outside the room until dawn?" he asked, without turning. "Not as Alpha, as his father, as your chosen guard, if you will allow it." Alara looked at the knife beneath her pillow, at the sleeping child, at the man waiting for an answer he could have taken by decree, and had not. Weariness settled over her all at once, heavy and unfamiliar, because it carried no immediate terror. "Yes," she said, "you may stay." He inclined his head and stepped into the corridor. She heard him speak softly to the sentries, then the shift of his weight as he sat against the wall beside her door. For the first night in 5 years, Alara lay down without a blade in her hand. By first light, frost edged the inner courtyard stones, and a summons came from council before the breakfast fires had fully caught. The rebuilt Pack Hall's council chamber had once been a mill counting room. Now it carried authority in layers. Old stone walls hung with blackwood banners, benches crowded with survivors who had earned rank rebuilding from ruin. Ilara stood at the chamber center with Cale beside her and felt every gaze like weight. Garrick occupied the left rank in formal leathers, expression shuddered. 3 elders sat on the dais, age silvering their hair and sharpening their caution into cruelty. The eldest, Mara Thorne, struck her staff once. "We convene on bloodline dispute and public misuse of Alpha Command. Child Cale's legitimacy is unverified. The mother concealed lineage from recognized authority for 5 years. Under succession protocol, immediate separation for training and testing is advised." Separation! The word thudded through Alara's body like a blow. Cale pressed against her leg. A younger counselor leaned forward, thin smile too neat. "Until verification, the woman can be held in administrative custody. Humane, of course. Humane." Another neat word for cage. Alara drew breath to answer, but Owen moved first. He stepped from the high seat and down to the chamber floor, placing himself physically between her and the dais. His voice did not rise. It cut cleaner for being controlled. "Denied." Mara Thorne's eyes narrowed. "Alpha, protocol exists to prevent fraud." "Protocol does not supersede Alpha protection law." Owen turned, making sure the entire chamber could hear. "By that law, Alara Darkhollow and her son are under my direct protection, pending witness sense confirmation, which I have already completed. Any threat, coercion, or attempted removal directed at Alara is henceforth treated as threat to recognized bloodline." A murmur rolled across the benches, startled and sharp. Garrick spoke, measured but hard. "With respect, Alpha, you ask this chamber to accept private bond testimony and a child's uncontrolled command as sufficient evidence. Wolves are afraid. They need structure." "Then give them lawful structure," Owen said, "not fear dressed as procedure." The younger counselor rose halfway from his seat. "If she is innocent, she should submit to temporary custody." Owen turned his head just enough that his profile faced the dais, and something feral moved behind his eyes. "Sit down." The counselor sat. Mara Thorne lifted her staff again. "You overreach. Council can issue formal censure if Alpha discretion endangers Pack stability." "I am aware," Owen said. "Issue it to me." Silence fell heavy and complete. Alara stared at him, stunned. A formal censure would shackle his authority for a full moon cycle on resource and military orders. In a settlement already strained by raids, it was no symbolic slap. It was risk. Mara Thorne studied him for a long beat, then nodded once to the scribe. "Recorded. Censure of discretion entered against Alpha Owen Blackwood." The scratch of pen on parchment sounded almost violent. Owen did not flinch. He faced the chamber again. "Hearing adjourned. We reconvene in 2 days with external witnesses and lawkeeper review. Until then, no one approaches Alara or Kale without her consent. Garrick. His beta stood. You will assign your best 2 guards to escort Alara and Kale home now. Home, not holding rooms. If any wolf obstructs them, that obstruction is treated as direct defiance of my order. Garrick's jaw tightened, then settled. Understood, Alpha. As the chamber broke into tense, overlapping voices, Owen turned toward Alara. He did not touch her. He did not crowd. He simply held her gaze with stark, tired sincerity. I know what this cost you already, he said quietly. I am trying to make sure it does not cost you your son. Alara felt the old reflex rise, the instinct to distrust any promise spoken in a hall of power. Yet what she had witnessed was not possession disguised as care. It was a man taking political wound onto his own back, rather than placing her under lock and calling it safety. When she answered, her voice remained cautious, but the edge had changed. Then walk with us to the gate. A faint, surprised softness touched his expression. I will. And when they stepped from the chamber with Kale between them and Garrick's guards falling into respectful distance behind, Alara realized she was no longer counting exits alone. The courtyard wind cut colder than the council chamber, carrying frost and the metallic scent of coming snow. Kale walked between Alara and Owen with his hand tucked into hers, his carved wolf peeking from his pocket, while Garrick's chosen guards held a disciplined distance behind them. Wolves stopped what they were doing to watch them pass, not with open hostility this time, but with the brittle focus of a pack measuring fault lines under fresh weight. They had nearly reached the gate when a runner vaulted down from the rampart stairs, breath smoking hard, cloak half-fastened. He dropped to one knee before Owen and held out a strip of black leather stamped with ash-gray sigils. Southwatch intercepted 2 raiders before dawn, he said. Not local. Duskwalker marks on both. The name landed like stone in Alara's stomach. Owen took the strip, jaw tightening. Alive? 1 fled. 1 in holding. Claims he was paid in winter grain and river passage to spread word that your heir is false and your hall divided. Garrick swore under his breath, mild and clipped. Not a raid. A rumor campaign with teeth. Alara felt Kale glance up at her, reading tension he did not yet understand. She squeezed his fingers once and kept her face even. Owen turned the sigil strip over in his hand, then looked to Garrick. Double patrols on south and east routes. Quietly. I do not want panic in the lower terraces. You are under censure, Garrick said, careful but blunt. Council can challenge troop movements larger than 6. Then move 6 at a time and rotate every 2 hours. Garrick's mouth pressed thin. Done. A horn sounded from the outer path before anyone could move, 1 long call and 2 short, the signal for an approaching envoy under formal claim. Every head in the gate yard lifted. The guards on the wall shifted bows into ready position but did not notch arrows. A lone wolf in travel leathers stood beyond the boundary stones with both hands raised and a white branch tied across his back. Neutral messenger by old code. He waited while Blackwood sentries searched him at spear length, then allowed himself to be led through the outer gate as if entering a courtroom. He did not look at the gathered wolves. He looked only at Owen. Moon-sealed challenge, the messenger said, and knelt. From inside his cloak he produced a flat slate wrapped in oiled cloth and bound with silver thread. At its center sat a wax seal impressed with a raven skull over crossed thorns. Alara's breath turned shallow. She had seen that seal once before, on a slaughter writ pinned to the doors of her first home. Owen did not touch it immediately. State sender and terms as witnessed. The messenger swallowed. Raven Duskwalker, Alpha of the Duskwalker Dominion, claimant of the South Cut Roots by Conquest Charter, accuses Blackwood of harboring a lawbreaker and false successor. He invokes challenge right at next moonrise and demands surrender of Alara Darkhollow for judgment. Refusal, he says, will be treated as admission of fraud and act of war against trade settlements under dispute. Murmurs broke across the courtyard, sharp and frightened. Owen took the slate then, breaking the silver thread with his thumb. Black wax cracked. He scanned the carved lines and handed the tablet to Garrick, who went still halfway through reading. "There is more," Garrick said grimly, and passed it to Alara. The script was cut deep enough to survive weather and handling. Raven's hand, angular and arrogant, ran down the stone in legal clauses twisted to menace. Surrender Ilara for inquiry, relinquish custody of lineage archives, submit Kale for external blood testing under Duskwalker witnesses, or face sanctioned seizure of grain roots and protective acquisition of displaced wolves of breeding age. At the bottom, one final line. "We have followed the widow since the first ashes cooled. Bring her out, or I will come take what she carries." Kale leaned against her leg, trying to see. She turned the slate away from him and passed it back, fingers numb. Owen's voice when he spoke was flat with controlled fury. "Escort the messenger out with food and no injuries. He carried words, not blades." The envoy exhaled as if he had expected worse, and bowed himself backward before the guards took him. Owen waited until the gate shut again, then faced Alara fully. Around them, activity resumed in brittle bursts, wolves moving faster than before, fear now threaded through every motion. "Raven is not testing us," he said. "He is opening campaign." Alara stared past him at the frosted stones, and old memory rose clear as cut glass. Raven in a moonlit hall, smiling while elders argued procedure over still warm bodies. He had always preferred law when law could be weaponized. "What he wants first is not me," she said quietly. "It is the records. If he destroys kinship lines, displaced packs stay fragmented. No one can prove whose oath belongs where. He keeps ruling by starvation and confusion." Owen's gaze sharpened. "You still have them on you?" "Yes." "Good. From this moment, they do not leave your body unless you hand them to me directly." The bond between them pulled hard at close distance, not a comfort now but a current charged by shared danger. Alara met his eyes and saw the same calculation she felt in her own bones: routes, witnesses, law, winter stores, who could be trusted under pressure. Fear was there, but so was alignment, swift and unsettling. By dusk, the temperature dropped another degree, and smoke from cook fires flattened low over the compound. Owen insisted on honoring her request to return home rather than moving her by decree, but he walked with her himself, Garrick and 4 guards flanking at roofline intervals instead of crowding the lane. Kale chattered for half the first street about honey bread and miscounting numbers, then fell quiet as the market district came into view and shutters closed early against rumor. Inside the cottage, Alara checked every latch while Owen stood near the hearth waiting for permission before crossing deeper. Kale changed into dry clothes and curled on the stool with his carved wolf, drowsy from the long day. "I need blunt truth," Owen said when the child's eyelids started to droop. "How many copies of those records exist?" "None complete." She pulled the oilcloth packet free and set it on the table between them. 3 fragments are hidden with separate keepers. Names only. No route maps. This is the only full ledger with witness seals. Then Raven cannot be allowed near this room, or near the circle where he can turn challenge law into spectacle and call it justice. They stood over the packet together, close enough that she felt the heat of him at her shoulder. He smelled of clean wool, steel oil, and the rain-cold air outside, familiar now in a way that unsettled her more than fear did. She had built herself around solitude until it felt like moral law. This man kept stepping into that architecture and reinforcing beams she had assumed were only hers to carry. "I am afraid of wanting help because help can be withdrawn. I am afraid of this pull because it asks for tenderness where I have stored knives. Yet when he listens, something unclenches behind my ribs, and I resent the relief almost as much as I crave it. I do not want to be rescued. I want partnership that survives disagreement, law that does not turn me into evidence, touch that waits for consent even in urgency. If he cannot be that, I leave. If he can, I no longer know how to pretend I do not feel it. Kale stirred and rubbed his face. Mama, are we sleeping here? Ilara answered before Owen could. Tonight. Yes. Tomorrow depends on the moon. Owen crouched beside the boy, keeping his voice calm. 2 guards outside, 1 on the back lane. No one comes in unless your mother says. Kale nodded solemnly, then pointed at Owen's forearm where a cut, shallow but fresh, had reopened through his sleeve seam. You're leaking. Owen glanced down, almost embarrassed. I lost an argument with a splintered railing. Ilara fetched clean water and strips of linen before she could reconsider. When she wrapped his arm, his hand stayed still on the table, knuckles scarred, pulse steady beneath her fingers. He watched her with an attention that felt almost reverent and did not reach for more. The quiet between them held too much: grief, recognition, restraint, and the low, fierce warmth of a bond no council could vote away. 3 days passed before the next move came, and by then every trader in town knew Raven's name again. Whispers multiplied faster than patrol reports. A tanner claimed he had seen Duskwalker scouts counting grain carts. A ferryman swore 2 strangers offered him silver to describe Blackwood Guard rotations. An herbalist reported customers asking whether succession law allowed council override if an alpha's heir appeared conveniently. Each rumor tugged at the same seam: fraud, instability, surrender the widow and restore order. Owen answered with process and visibility. He opened ration tallies to public review, posted mixed patrols of veterans and young wolves to blunt faction talk, and requested a lawkeeper from neutral territory to witness the coming challenge. Mara Thorne filed objection, then withdrew it when half the lower terraces signed in favor of transparent hearing. Garrick, still stiff with pride after Market Square, became unexpectedly meticulous in carrying out Owen's orders to the letter, as if precision itself were apology. On the 4th evening, Ilara sat in Owen's map room while Kale slept in an antechamber under guard, and together they copied the lineage ledger by lamplight onto 3 coded sheets. Owen wrote quickly, clean hand, no wasted strokes. Ilara dictated names, dates, oath marks, and burial sites. Each line another life dragged back from erasure. When her voice faltered at her first mate's name, Owen set his pen down and waited in silence until she nodded to continue. A knock came at midnight, urgent but controlled. Garrick entered without preamble. North Granary Annex took fire, he said. Contained, but 2 stores lost. No casualties. We found this driven into the doorframe. He held out a black feathered dart with a raven thorn insignia carved into the shaft. Owen took it, expression hardening. Signal strike. They want us sleep-starved before moonrise. Also, Garrick added, glancing once at Ilara, courier intercepted at West Bridge carrying forged council writs authorizing seizure of disputed documents from river residences. 3 addresses listed. Yours is first. The room went very still. Ilara rolled the copied sheets and sealed them in wax while Owen spoke. Original ledger stays with Ilara. Copy 1 to vault under dual key, mine and hers. Copy 2 to neutral lawkeeper on arrival. Copy 3 with runner to island archives before dawn. Garrick nodded. I will choose the runner myself. He had just turned to leave when the outer bell began to hammer, not summons rhythm, alarm. 1 strike, 2, then continuous ringing. A guard shouted from the corridor, voice cracking with urgency. West wall breach attempt, masked wolves at the lower postern. They are calling your name, Ilara Darkhollow, and demanding surrender by challenge law. Kale woke in the antechamber and cried out, frightened but unhurt. Alara was moving before thought finished, crossing to him, gathering him into her arms. Owen was already at the door issuing orders with terrifying calm. Seal inner corridor. Garrick, take 12 to West Postern. No lethal force unless they cross second threshold. Alara and Kale to the inner archive room now. Another shout from outside, nearer this time. Fire in the market quarter. Multiple points. Raven was not probing anymore. He was conducting. Owen turned back to Alara, eyes fierce and steady. This is coordinated pressure to force immediate surrender. If we fragment, he controls the narrative by dawn. Alara held Kale tighter, feeling his small heartbeat race against her collarbone, and met Owen's stare with a clarity that burned through fear. Then we stop reacting and choose the ground ourselves. The bell kept ringing as smoke scent reached the hall, thin at first, then thicker, and from beyond the walls came the distant roar of a crowd tipping from rumor into panic. Alara moved with Kale in her arms toward the inner archive corridor, but her mind had already outrun her feet. Fire at multiple points, forged writs, masked wolves invoking challenge law at the West Postern, Raven's seal threaded through all of it. He was not trying to breach stone. He was trying to fracture legitimacy in public and force Owen to choose between brutality and weakness. At the corridor mouth, she stopped so abruptly Owen nearly collided with her. No vault, she said. No hiding me in a locked room while he writes the story outside. His expression sharpened. This is not debate time. It is exactly that. She shifted Kale to her hip and held Owen's stare. Raven wants me dragged out as contraband. If you barricade me, he claims you are shielding fraud. If you surrender me, he claims lawful custody. Either way, he owns the narrative by dawn. Garrick came up at a run, soot on his sleeve. West Postern held. They lit tar at the hinges and shouted demands for formal handover. We drove them back from first threshold. Market quarter fires are controlled at 2 points, still burning near the dye sheds. He glanced between Owen and Alara, reading the conflict. Alpha? Alara answered first. Sound challenge horns. Open the lower square. Send word to every displaced wolf camp within earshot that Alara Darkhollow invokes Widow's Right at the Stone Circle tonight. Garrick went still. Owen's voice dropped low. That law compels public confrontation between survivor and accused, not military engagement. Exactly. Her pulse hammered, but her words came clean. Raven can twist counsels in closed rooms. He cannot refuse a widow's call before witnesses without admitting cowardice and bad faith. He comes, he speaks, and he stands inside oath runes where lies have cost. Owen took one step closer, fierce and controlled. He will come to kill you. He has been trying for 5 years. She set Kale down and knelt, hands on her son's shoulders. You stay with Garrick until I call for you. You do not leave his side. Not for me. Not for anyone. Kale's eyes shone wet but steady. Are you fighting the Raven Man? I am ending his hunt. By the time the moon cleared the eastern ridge, Blackwood horns had carried her invocation across terraces, riverbanks, and winter camps beyond the mill road. Wolves streamed toward the ancient stone circle above town, not in orderly ranks, but in clumps of loyalty and fear. Blackwood laborers in ash-stained cloaks, displaced families with travel packs still on their backs, neutral traders, 2 law scribes from the ferry district, and at last the neutral lawkeeper Owen had summoned, Soren Vale, wrapped in gray with the iron scale emblem pinned at his throat. Garrick met Alara at the circle edge and pressed a folded scrap into her hand. Runner crossed to the island archives before the bridge lockdown, he said. Copy 3 delivered. Vault copy sealed under dual key. Lawkeeper has copy 2. Original remains with you. Physical proof no longer lived in one body alone. The tightness in her chest eased by a single breath. The circle itself woke under moonlight. Old stones veined with dormant silver. Oath runes faint as old scars. Owen stood at her right in formal blackened fur, censure band still tied around his forearm as a visible reminder that he had paid politically to shield her. He kept half a pace back, exactly where she had asked him to stand. Cale was on the outer ring with Garrick and two she-wolves from the nursery quarter, wrapped in a heavy cloak, safe and visible without being exposed. Raven arrived without hurry. He entered between torch lines with 20 wolves in dark leathers, raventhorn insignia stitched in matte thread that drank light. He was taller than she remembered and leaner, age carving angles without softening anything. His hair was bound back from a narrow face built for contempt. When his gaze found Alara, satisfaction moved across his mouth like a blade being drawn. "So, the widow learned theater," he called. "You could have saved your settlement trouble and walked out when asked." Soren Vale lifted his staff. "Under witnessed invocation of widow's right, all challenge speech is recorded. No wolf crosses the inner ring without consent of invoker and respondent. Breach voids claim and triggers sanction." Raven spread his hands, smiling. "I adore procedure." Alara stepped into the circle's center and unwrapped the oilcloth ledger where all could see. Murmurs ran through the crowd at the sight of old seals. Raven's pupils narrowed. "That book is stolen archive," he said. "Hand it over for verification." She did not move. "This ledger holds kinship lines you tried to erase. Tonight you answer for raids on border settlements, forged writs, granary fire signaling, and the massacre at Dark Hollow Ridge." His laugh was soft, nearly pitying. "You have grief in ink. I have charter and witnesses that your child is a planted fraud." Raven turned slightly, voice carrying. "Blackwood shelters a woman who hid an alleged heir for 5 years while Root starved. Ask yourselves why." The old fear stirred in the crowd. Alara felt it as a pressure wave. This was his strength. Poison in plausible language. She drew her knife, turned the blade inward, and cut her palm in one clean line. Blood welled bright in moonlight. She pressed her hand to the central rune stone. Silver fire raced through the carved channels with a sound like ice cracking on a river. The ring flared alive around Raven's boots. Gasps rose on all sides. Soren Vale's voice rang out. "Oath runes engaged by blood right. Respondent is now bound to truth cost testimony." Raven's smile thinned. "Parlor tricks." "Step out then," Alara said. He tried. The moment his foot crossed the inner groove, a band of silver light snapped around his wrists and dragged his arms to his sides, not injuring, simply holding with inexorable force. His composure fractured for the first time. Chaos rippled at the circle edge as his wolves lunged forward. Owen's command cut through the movement. "Hold lines!" Blackwood guards locked shields. Garrick planted himself in front of Cale, jaw set, while the nursery wolves dropped into protective crouches around the boy. Raven strained against the restraints, voice rising. "Release this circus." Alara stepped closer, blood still dripping from her palm onto stone. "State under rune whether you ordered forged council writs naming my residence for seizure." He glared at her. "Yes." The silver restraints tightened a fraction at the bitterness in the word, then settled. "State whether you paid raiders in grain and passage to spread false heir claims." His lip curled. "Yes." "State whether you directed fires tonight to force immediate surrender." His shoulders shook with rage. "Yes." Each admission ignited another rune along the circle's rim, brightening the night until faces in the crowd looked carved from gold and shadow. Alara opened the ledger with her uninjured hand, her voice carried farther than she expected, steadier than she felt. "Darian Vale, Oathkeeper of South Cut, slain at Truce Gate. Mira Stoneheart, Healer, burned in infirmary lock. Tolan Dark Hollow, sworn mate and ridge captain, executed under false charter." Her throat tightened on the last name, but she did not pause. "Edric Blackwood and 6 kin at River Ford under Parley flag. 23 unranked displaced uncounted in official tallies." Raven bared his teeth. Names do not rebuild packs. No, she said. Truth does. He lunged suddenly, not at her, but toward the outer ring where Kale stood. The restraints snapped him short mid-stride, silver bands crossing his chest and throat, dragging him to one knee with a raw, furious snarl. Kale flinched behind Garrick but did not cry out. Raven's voice cracked open, stripped of polish. You were supposed to stay broken. Alara met his gaze across the blazing runes. You mistook survival for surrender. He spat at the stone. I made this territory function. I culled weak lines and consolidated command. Your precious records would have united wolves against necessary rule. Necessary for whom? For order. He laughed once, ragged. For me. The confession landed like a hammer in a silent court. Soren Vale raised his staff, face severe. Recorded under active runes, charges substantiated. Owen stepped into the ring then, eyes hard as winter iron. Raven Duskwalker, under Alpha Law and witnessed confession, I challenge for rank, territory claim, and sanction right. Raven lifted his head, feral hatred burning through him. Accepted. Soren dropped his staff between them to mark distance, then withdrew. The silver restraints released at Owen's signal, leaving Raven free within the circle and nowhere else. They circled once on wet stone, two seasoned alphas carrying old ruin in their shoulders. Raven struck first, fast and dirty, aiming for Owen's censure arm. Owen pivoted, took the glancing hit, and answered with a body check that drove Raven across two rune lines. Boots scraped, breath tore, fists and forearms collided in controlled violence that stayed brutally efficient without tipping to spectacle. Raven fought like a cornered blade, all angles and spite. Owen fought like a builder defending foundations, relentless and precise. The crowd tracked each exchange in collective silence broken only by the crack of impact and short commands from Soren to keep boundaries clear. Raven tried a feint and went for Owen's throat scar. Owen caught his wrist, twisted, and sent him hard to the stone. Raven rolled, came up half-shifted with claws extending, but Soren's staff struck the ground once. Claw used Void's rank claim under mixed witness duel, the lawkeeper warned. Raven ignored him and lunged anyway. Owen met him mid-charge, locked him at the shoulders, and slammed him down inside the central sigil. Silver runes flared up around Raven's limbs like forged chains returning to their mold. He thrashed once, then stilled when Owen's forearm pinned his chest and the point of an iron short blade touched the hollow beneath his jaw. Yield, Owen said. Raven laughed through blood at his split lip. To a censured alpha and his widow mascot? Owen did not look away. Yield, or be judged in full. Raven turned his head toward Alara, hatred distilled to pure venom. Even now he stands over you and calls it mercy. Alara stepped to the edge of the ring, voice clear. Sentence is mine to speak as invoker. Raven Duskwalker, by witnessed confession, oath breach, arson campaign, forged writs, and massacre record, I reject execution. Death ends too quickly. I claim banishment brand and territorial expulsion. A tremor passed through the assembly. This penalty was older than most packs, reserved for wolves whose names had to remain as warning. Soren Vale inclined his head. Law permits. Owen's gaze flicked to Alara, asking final confirmation. She nodded once. He pressed the iron blade flat to Raven's shoulder where Raven Thorn insignia sat stitched under leather. The rune at Owen's wrist flashed. The brand took as a silver-black mark that spread through the emblem and erased it to ash. Raven screamed once, rage more than pain, and bucked under the restraints. By witness of packs, Owen said, voice carrying to the far stones. Raven Duskwalker is stripped of rank, claim, and command. He is exiled beyond the boundary stones. Any wolf harboring him inside these territories forfeits standing protections. Garrick stepped forward with 4 guards. They hauled Raven upright between them. He twisted enough to throw one last look at Alara, face ruined by disbelief. "This is not over." She held his stare without blinking. "For us, it is." Under torchlight and moon, with every witness watching, Raven was dragged past the ring, through the opened lane, and out beyond the boundary stones into the black country he had used to hunt others. No wolf followed him. No voice called him Alpha again. For several breaths after Raven vanished into the dark, the stone circle held a stunned quiet, as if the old runes themselves were listening for any protest that might try to undo what had been witnessed. None came. Torches hissed in the wind. Wolves who had arrived divided by rumor stood shoulder to shoulder now, faces lit by the same silver glow that still traced the carved grooves under Alara's blood. Soren Vale stepped into the center and lifted his staff. Sentence executed under witness law, confession, dual result, and sanction are entered. He looked to Alara first, then Owen. Challenge is complete. Claimants may declare settlement terms. Owen did not answer him immediately. He turned to Alara instead, and the ferocity that had held him through combat gentled into something far more dangerous to her guarded heart, open devotion with nowhere to hide. "Then I declare this first," he said, voice carrying clearly to every ring of listeners. "No wolf in these territories will compel Alara Darkhollow by rank, counsel, or custom. Not tonight, not ever. She chooses her place, she chooses me, or she does not." Mara Thorne, rigid on the outer ring, gave one slow nod, formal assent under law. Garrick bowed his head. Even the wind seemed to ease. Alara could feel Kale's gaze on her from behind Garrick's shoulder, wide and solemn, waiting to learn what kind of power came after justice. Her cut palm throbbed in the cold. The bond between her and Owen burned low and steady, not demanding, simply present, like heat banked under stone. I am standing in the same moonlight that once watched me bury everything. I am still afraid. The fear is real, and it is not the whole truth anymore. I do not want rescue. I want witness. I want reciprocity. I want a life where my son sees love chosen in daylight, not negotiated in shadows. She crossed the final step between them. When she stopped, Owen held perfectly still, waiting. "Ilara," he said softly, for her alone now, "if you want this, I am yours in front of all of them. If you do not, I remain your ally and Kale's father, with no lesser duty." In answer, she reached up with her uninjured hand and drew aside the collar of her cloak, baring the junction of neck and shoulder. It was not surrender. It was consent, deliberate and unshaking. A shiver passed through the gathered wolves, old instinct recognizing sacred right. Owen's hands came to her waist, gentle, giving her time to step back. She did not. His forehead touched hers for one brief breath. "Mine," he whispered, reverent, asking and promising in the same word. "Yours," she whispered back. His mouth found the offered place. The bite was swift and precise, pain flashing bright enough to steal air from her lungs for a heartbeat, then transforming almost instantly into a molten pulse that spread down her spine and through her chest in widening rings. The world tilted, not from weakness but from sudden, overwhelming alignment. Scents sharpened: cedar smoke, wet stone, her son's wool cloak, Owen's skin, iron and rain and home. She felt his shock mirror hers through the bond as it sealed, felt his fierce joy and old grief surge together and settle into a single, vow-shaped current. A low sound broke from him, half wonder, half prayer. "Mate." The word moved through her like a bell struck deep in water. She steadied him when his knees bent, one hand braced to his shoulder. Their roles had never fit simple stories, and she refused to begin now. She turned him by the collar, found the thick line of muscle where neck met shoulder, and bared her teeth. His breath hitched. He did not flinch. Her bite landed clean. Pain sparked under her jaw and in his body at once, then broke into warmth so profound it felt like sunlight under skin in the dead of winter. Gold-lit threads arced between them, visible to every witness, flowing from heart to heart before sinking inward and vanishing beneath flesh. Owen's hands tightened at her back, not restraining, anchoring. She tasted salt, heat, and the unmistakable rightness of chosen reciprocity. "Mine," he whispered against her hair, dazed and smiling. "Mate," she answered into his shoulder. When they drew apart, both breathing hard, the mark at her neck pulsed once with soft amber light, matched by the new crescent at his shoulder. The bond settled into a calm, constant heat beneath her sternum, no longer a storm current, now a hearth fire. Cale broke from the outer ring then, with Garrick one pace behind, and hurled himself into Alara's side with all the force a 5-year-old could muster. She laughed through tears and folded him between them. Owen dropped to one knee to meet his height, touching the boy's cheek with 2 careful fingers. "Still with me, little mathematician?" he asked. Cale examined the fresh mark on Owen's shoulder and then the one at Ilara's throat with grave concentration. "So now you are both stuck." Garrick made an undignified choking sound that might have been laughter. Even Marathorn's stern mouth twitched. "Bound," Owen corrected. Cale considered and nodded, stuck but happy. By dawn, frost silvered the circle stones where her blood had dried into the runes, and the first formal assembly convened in the rebuilt hall. This time, Alara entered through the main doors with Owen at her side, and Cale between them, not as evidence under dispute, but as recognized bloodline under witnessed law. The chamber was full, not only Blackwood ranks but delegates from 3 displaced packs and 2 neutral trade houses. Soren Vale stood near the scribe table while sealed packets changed hands under watch. He spoke each item into record with measured clarity. Original Dark Hollow ledger transferred to Sanctuary Vault under triple seal. Alpha Blackwood, Luna designate Alara Dark Hollow, and neutral lawkeeper Mark. Copy 1 remains in Blackwood Archive under dual key. Copy 2 lodged with neutral tribunal. Copy 3 confirmed delivered to Island Archives by named runner Taven Reed at first light. He lifted a charred dart in tongs and a strip of black sigil leather. Arson signal dart and Duskwalker raid insignia entered as corroborating physical evidence. Forged seizure writs recovered at West Bridge are nullified and archived for prosecution. Nothing vanished into rumor. Everything was accounted for. Mara Thorne rose slowly. Censure issued against Alpha Owen Blackwood is hereby withdrawn, grounds reversed by lawful necessity and successful defense of Pack. She turned to Alara, and the old severity in her gaze held something new, respect earned the hard way. "Alara Dark Hollow, do you accept elevation as Luna of Blackwood and Keeper of Oaths, with full authority over sanctuary law, widow claims, and succession rights?" Alara felt the chamber's attention settle, waiting for her to be symbolic, decorative, quiet. She let them wait one breath longer than comfort allowed. "I accept," she said, "on condition that sanctuary petitions remain reviewable by mixed counsel, and no child is ever removed from a parent under administrative language without open hearing." Mara Thorne struck her staff once. So entered. Garrick stepped forward next, no longer hiding behind procedure. He knelt before Cale, fist over heart. "I accused in haste and forgot law in public. I was wrong." He looked up at Alara. "If you permit it, I will train him when he is ready, under your terms and Owen's, with restraint first and command last." Cale glanced at his mother. At her nod, he stuck out his small hand. Garrick took it like receiving a treaty. By evening, the lower market reopened under guard and torchlight, and displaced wolves lined the square to swear new oath terms. Not submission to fear, but mutual protection clauses, Alara wrote herself from the recovered kinship lines. The woman who had laughed at the spice cart watched from a distance and never approached. Whatever judgment she had prepared died unspoken, and Alara let it pass into irrelevance. The messenger who had carried Raven's challenge returned under White Branch to witness the new accords, and left with grain instead of threats. No one touched a weapon. At the hearth in Owen's house, later, with snow beginning outside in quiet, dry flakes, 3 scents braided in the warm air: cedar, milk bread, and rain-cooled iron. Cale sat cross-legged on a rug, reciting numbers while Garrick, off-duty and visibly humbled, pretended to lose count on purpose until the child crowed victory. Owen leaned against the mantel with his censure band cut into strips for kindling, watching Alara as if he still could not quite believe she was real and here. She crossed to him, touched the mark at his shoulder, then offered her throat for a brief, tender nuzzle over the answering mark there. No fear rose, no blade reflex followed. Only the settled heat of bond and the steady architecture of trust built in witnessed choices. "No more running alone," he murmured. She rested her forehead to his and listened to their son laugh by the fire in a hall that no longer felt borrowed. No more surviving without being seen.